Good evening, good evening, good evening. It is Thursday, February 12th, and it's time for Let's Talk Power Live. Who am I? I'm Dr. Tangi. I'm your host, show host. I'm a CEO, founder. I'm an author. I'm an educator. I'm a researcher. I'm a lot of things. But today I'm here with you, and I am thrilled to be so. We're in week 2, Black History Month, and this year it seems different. Black History Month has always been a very wonderful time of celebration. I remember when I was a child, I didn't learn a lot about Black American history in school, but I was very astute because we learned it at home and we learned it at church. And then I taught myself a lot of what I really wanted to know about who I was as a Black American. This year, with all that's going on in our country and around the world, Black History Month carries a special weight. And I'm thrilled to be here today talking about the power, the instructional power we have created. And welcome you to the show. If you are new to Let's Talk Power Live, welcome. Thank you for being here. If you are a subscriber, thank you so much for being a subscriber. And for my folks who are not subscribed yet, please go ahead and subscribe. Hit the like button, share it. The conversation about power and education is a real one, and it happens in spots and spurts, but I am committed to having a real conversation about power and education. Why? Because power and education is real, and instructional power is even more so. So, what are we going to talk about? Oh, wait, I forgot. What are you thankful for? Well, let me tell you what I'm thankful for. I'm thankful for the opportunity to have been able to support a group of principals yesterday for a wonderful professional development session where we worked on alignment between what they say they believe and what their outcomes are showing. And in like many places, there really is a gap between what educators say they believe about instruction and what's happening on the back end of student outcomes. And I said to the group, you have one of two things. You got a kid problem or you got something else. Because if the majority of students are not proficient according to your state standards and according to NAEP scores and other measures, then we are saying that we got a kid problem. And if we say that we don't have a kid problem, then we got something else. And that was how we spent our time. Hey, Peaceful, thank you for being here. I'm so glad you're here. I think it's Zanaya. Hello. Thank you so much for being here. I always appreciate having guests come in. Please share your ideas. Uh, uh, okay. You are a disgusting person. I'm going to remove you. Thank you. I appreciate people being here, but I don't want you to be nasty while you are here. So, that was an interesting thing. Never had that before. Raymond Jimenez, thank you for, I think it's Raihana Jimenez. Thank you for being here. Well, anyway, here's what we got. So we're going to talk about power in education. And I'm going to share with you my definition of power in education because I share it every week and because people always ask me, why do you talk about power in education? I do because it's a real thing. So here is the definition. Education is the instrument of democratic designs, and it is no less the instrument of power. The control of information, the shaping of understanding, and the influence of judgment are critical elements common to democratic design, power theory, and educational philosophy. That is what this is all about. And it is really, really important for us to have that conversation. But then the other conversation is, well, if that's what power in education is about, what is instructional power? Here is what instructional power is all about. Instructional power can be understood as an educator's use of their state, district, and building ascribed job-related authority to afford or constrain access to learning. But I wanted to go a step further because someone asked me, well, there's no definition of it out in the world. And perhaps there isn't. And I want to add one dimension. When I talk about the ability to afford or constrain, I want to add to that that when you are an educator at any level, leader, building, classroom, wherever you are, your actions determine whether or not you are exercising your power in a way that opens access or in a way that constrains it. And that's why I want to be really clear about what that means. But tonight's conversation, we're going to be talking about the power that we as Black Americans have inherited. And we've inherited a lot of instructional power. So let's go ahead and talk about that conversation right now. So, want to begin like I do most weeks. I really do like to talk about, I want to give some data because data tells a story and data is a grounder. And right now, I want to raise this truth. After the Civil War, freed people and Black institutions, often with Freedmen's Bureau participation or partnership, helped establish 3,000 schools across the South, serving roughly 150,000 students or learners. I don't want to call, well, I'm going to say students because that's kind of what I always talk about, right? But we're talking about 150,000 learners across the South. And we're focusing on the South because that's where the fight for our emancipation was wrought in an explicit way. In the North, we like to think that the North was innocent. The commerce of the North was built on the engine of the South. Our banks, our factories, those were in the North and other places. And so we like to pretend that our Civil War was a Southern situation when it was a national one. But right after the Civil War, we see this explosion in literacy that becomes above ground. During slavery, and we know because there were Virginia codes, there were literacy codes. I live in the state of Virginia, and sometimes it really bothers me that we have such a torrid history around literacy for Black Americans. But I want to make this point, and I want to say that what we dealt with back then, what we dealt with was literacy that was actually stolen. For all intents and purposes, stolen literacy because it was illegal. And it literally was a matter of life and death. People could be killed if they were caught learning how to read, reading, and teaching others how to read. So in two books I'm going to talk about, I'm a reference tonight beside my own, two books want to talk about. One is Self-Taught by Heather Williams, and the other one is Fugitive Pedagogy by Jarvis Gibbons. And in both of those texts, they lay out, the researchers, the authors lay out a legacy of inherited instructional power where Black Americans who were enslaved really took it upon themselves to learn how to read because they recognized that to survive, they had to be literate. And they became literate in myriad ways. They did it in ditches, they did it underground, they did it in homes, they did it in churches, they did it in the woods, and they would pretend that they didn't know how to read. They were engaging in agency developing literacy growth because it was inherent upon them for their survival after the Civil War to be literate. So we see this explosion across the nation after Civil War, where these 3,000 learning sort of institutions, and that's a rough number because the Freedmen's Bureau really couldn't count all of the quote unquote ad hoc learning avenues, those that were in homes, those that were in churches that did not necessarily count as schools. But we have this explosion across the nation about these Black people, my people, taking it upon themselves to become literate. And last year, when I did my Black History Month segment, I talked about Robert Smalls. And Robert Smalls was the first Black senator from South Carolina. And through his work, he became instrumental in that state having its first public school system. So we see the empowerment of instructional power that was used to build agency in the face of the opposite use of instructional power that was meant to constrain, that made literacy illegal. So we see that literacy, or I'll say it this way, we see that instructional power has two forces. You see in my definition, you can constrain or you can afford. The legal forces at work in this country during that time, the instructional power, the curriculum that was not neutral, education is never neutral. So those forces were using the streams, the mechanisms, the tools of the government to lay down and use instructional power as a constraining force. In the face of that, you have enslaved and freed people using their instructional power to afford, to open access, to make it really clear that they were going to assume power on their own behalf. So I want to share some more information with you that we can take a look at right here so we can see what we've got. So our path to literacy, some data that, as I read it, I was so shocked. I knew it in one way, but I wasn't sure about it in another way. So here we go. In 1870, just 5 years after the Civil War, 4 out of 5 Black adults were recorded as unable to read or write. That means 80% of the Black population in 1870 in this country were what we would call illiterate because they could not read and they could not write. By 1900s, the Black illiteracy rate had been cut almost in half. So about 44% of Black adults were able to read and write. And by the 1930s, 80% of Black adults were literate. That is an incredible rate of literacy development. When you think about from 1870 to 1930, that's roughly 60 years to go from 80% unable to read, and you get to 80% able to read. That's 100% growth, even more than that. If you think about this from a numerical perspective, that is an incredible inheritance of instructional power, whose ability to afford and fight and ensure that Black Americans were able to become literate in order to survive in this country. That is an incredible story of the use of power on your own behalf. So I always like to talk about past is present. We tend to think the past is over. The past is never over. The past is always present with us. And so right here, I want to think through and talk with you about this idea of assessments. We know that assessments, I'm going to do one thing. Give me 1 second. There we go. We have a culture of assessments. I'm an educator. I was in the classroom for a very long time, and I work with educators across the country. Assessing in and of itself is not a bad thing. From the day a person is born, they get assessed. The first thing a doctor does when a child enters this realm is take measurements. It's important to understand, though, how assessments are used or have been used as tools to weaponize. So here's some information I want to share with everybody here. Standardized testing in the United States was built on eugenics and white supremacist ideology designed to rank people by race, class, and language. Now, in chapter 4 of my book, Understanding Your Instructional Power, I talk specifically about the English language and how it was meant to be used in the United States. But just know that this idea of assessments were designed as a mechanism of division, of separation. Next thing, test content, norming samples, and scoring methods systematically advantage white middle class students through cultural and linguistic bias. Studies were done on the SATs for decades. And on simple things like a person using the word bucket versus pail. And it wasn't that the child didn't know the content. They weren't using the language of bucket and pail, or all of the examples were in areas where white middle class people lived and involved in those activities. Things like skiing that may not necessarily attract or be common in places where they're not always going to be going skiing. So the way in which language has been used as a weapon, again, to divide. And we can talk about how language is being used to divide now in the wake of the Super Bowl, and how there was a great deal of angst about Bad Bunny not speaking English himself when English is his second language. But he's an American citizen. I digress. Next, when Black students gain access or improve scores, systems often introduce new hurdles, higher cut scores, harder placement tests, more gatekeeping. There is this need to constantly reinforce a narrative of Black underachievement. We constantly hear the framing of a Black achievement gap. Well, the gap is not an achievement gap. The gap is a resource gap. The gap is a gap where you're asking me to perform at a level when you have not provided the requisite instruction, the requisite resources. And not only do you not provide the requisite resources or instruction, you go out of your way to make getting those resources difficult. So as we think about the ability to go from 80% illiterate in 1870 to a more common rate of 80% or higher of literacy, and common numbers have the Black literacy rate, 88% of all Black Americans are literate. When we have that level of reversal, when there is a concerted, concentrated, systematic, and systemic push to undo every gain, this idea of instructional power resonates even more. Whether through test design or test use, assessments have been repeatedly weaponized to protect white advantage and police Black access to opportunity. So what does that even mean? That means that in the face of staggering opposition, life and death, literal, life and death, metaphorical, we have seen Black Americans exercise power in ways that afford opportunity and make it so that we are able to really be successful in the wake of staggering odds. This idea of opposition to growth, this idea of narratives that really keep it so that we are in this place of illiteracy. And the narrative, I was in a school today and we were talking about the ways in which students are going to perform on an upcoming assessment. And the coach in the building asked the teacher, well, how do you think students are going to perform on the assessment? Without blinking an eye, the teacher said, horribly. The number of students in her class, she had under 20 kids, and the majority of her students were students of color, primarily students who are learning English and students who look like me. They were Black and brown students in her class. And without blinking an eye, she said that they were going to perform horribly. That's not so bad in and of itself, but without the requisite strategy to support her kids, then she's leaning into a narrative of inability and lack. So as we think through what it means to actually exercise instructional power, because your students, your teachers are going to provide the kind of education that is in line with their core beliefs. The narrative in the United States has always been one of Black inability through eugenics, through our measuring of our brains, through Darwinism. We've always been presented as a group of people unable to be successful. We've always been presented as a group of people that were intellectually inferior. But if we look at what our history has shown us over the last near 400 years, we know that that is the opposite. The challenge, though, is that in buildings, in classrooms across the nation, and the data that comes out, we continue to see that the stated beliefs and the actual beliefs, there's a distance between them because the outcomes are more in line to what people actually say, to what they actually believe about Black and brown kids, that they are intellectually inferior. And so I want to think about, what does it mean if we were to turn the tide on this idea of Black inferiority? What does it look like when we use the inherited instructional power to move our literacy forward, to move our achievement forward? What does that look like and feel like? And every week I give you power moves. So I'm going to give us the power moves, and I'm going to talk through them this week. But before I do that, I want to remind you, please go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button. Would love to have you as a subscriber to the show. So let's go ahead and talk through our power moves for this week. Power move number 1. I want you to examine the memory beneath your practice. Now, here's the thing. You might say, what do you mean by the memory beneath my practice? We all have power memories. The way we understand ourselves as adults in relationship to children is shaped in how we experienced the adults in our lives when we were kids. So what does that look like in practice? I want you to notice what school taught you about controlling narratives. Either it was explicit, most times it was implicit. Those implicit narratives that you saw around you as a student and as an educator. Where did you begin to learn that certain people were better than others? You learned it somewhere. Or maybe you were in a family where you did not learn that, and I hope that you were. Identify beliefs you carry about who can learn. That's challenging because as educators, we are programmed to always say, I believe every kid can learn. That's what we're programmed to do. Unfortunately, that is not the truth. What we say we believe and what we actually believe are two different things. Next, name what feels normal but comes from history. This is about interrogation. We must interrogate the narratives that we have been fed over time because those narratives have come to us through a skewed lens. Power move number 2, protect learning as freedom work. Just like formerly enslaved Africans in this country, literacy and learning were about freedom. It wasn't about liking it or wanting to feel good about it. It was about, I have to learn because I have to be free. Learning was the pathway to freedom. So design choice, voice, and thinking as non-negotiable. The first word there is design. I know you've got curriculum. And inside that curriculum, you still have to design learning. The curriculum only moves to the degree that you move it. Refuse routines that require identity shelving. I talk about identity shelving in my book. It is when you have children put aside who they are in order to fit in to your learning environment, as opposed to making space and room for them to be who they are. So refuse those kinds of routines. Provide space for truth, community, and safety. I brought that one back from last week when I had Dr. Damon Harris on and we talked about the power of community. I wanted to bring that back because it is so salient. The impact of this: instruction begins to extend freedom, not reproduce limitation. When you allow young people to be who they are, particularly students who don't look like you, who come from a different background than you are signaling to them that you are disrupting negative and pejorative narratives. And that's the aim of schooling. And then power move number 3, teach toward the future, not just the past. What does that look like? Build classrooms where agency is structural and not just an activity. And we've got tools to really help you do that. So if you are not subscribed, I'm going to invite you to subscribe. And if you're not part of our email list, I'm going to invite you to become part of our email list where you can get these tools that would be helpful to you in understanding agency. And then align expectations with what I'm calling a pedagogy of possibility and not prediction. We like to say that prediction becomes the possible thing that we see when we create self-fulfilling prophecies. Well, I want you to disrupt that. I want you to really lean into the pedagogy of possibility and consider that every single student actually does have the capacity to learn, and really take that as your narrative, not just what the numbers say. The numbers tell a story, they don't tell the story. And then I'm going to power move number 3. The action step here is make liberation visible in daily learning experiences. How do you do that? Through your questioning, through the materials that you interrogate and you help your students interrogate. What's the impact of that? Instructional power will lead to agency and empowerment as opposed to protection and disenfranchisement. So you want to lean into these power moves to really shift the ground and take our inherited instructional power, our history, our memory, and our instructional power to really begin to engage and build agency and disrupt narratives that have kept groups of people stagnant in their learning. Commonly right now, as I said earlier, 88% of the Black community is considered literate, but 23% of our population is where Black students have the weakest literacy skills. Studies have shown that when an African American student graduates from the 12th grade, they have the equivalent of a 6th or 7th grade education. Let that sink in. They've been in school for 12 years, and yet when they graduate, they have learned the equivalent of 4 or more years less. That is different and a lot lower than their white and Asian counterparts. There's some belief we have to get to. there's some instructional power that is becoming a barrier. It's a constraining force. So, I'm going to give you that gem for the journey. Every week, we have really been inviting you on a journey for instructional power. If what I'm talking about resonates with you and you want to kickstart your understanding of your power memory, you want to engage in deep reflection about your learning environment, how to disrupt what you may not been able to name yet. So you want to name it and then you want to disrupt it. This is the course for you. It is 7 modules, all self-guided. You can do it individually, but of course, I'm going to invite you to do it with a colleague. There is the QR code and there is a link there because instructional power can be used to build agency, not disenfranchise. And now, I want to share, here's our recap. Learning has always carried resistance. Teaching has always had 2 possibilities, constrain or afford. Instructional power is inherited to empower or disenfranchise. So we have seen through history that people have used power systemically and systematically to disenfranchise. And we have seen the counteraction of that to build agency and enfranchise and empower. But right now, leaders, and when I say leaders, I mean leaders at every level, you must choose what's going to continue. Will you continue with the disenfranchisement and power protection? Or will you lean into agency and empowerment and growth to disrupt negative narratives? That's our recap for this week. But I had an announcement. This year marks year 3 of our book, Understanding Your Instructional Power. And we are celebrating with an exclusive giveaway. We are inviting you to join us on February 26th for a subscriber-only event. And you will be able to win a copy, a signed copy of our book, and a commemorative limited edition pin. But you gotta, 1, you gotta be a subscriber. 2, you have to join our email list so that we can get you the information and put your name into our drawing. But then lastly, you have to join the show that day so that we can pull your name, get your information, and get you your book and get you your pin. So go ahead, subscribe, join our email list. And if you have some questions about it, you can please DM me and we'll be happy to get you the information. So that's what we're doing. That's my special announcement, our 3rd anniversary celebration of the book. And if you don't have it, here's how you can get your book. There's a link right there. Please let us know if you have the book. Tag us on social media and let us know how instructional power is helping you disrupt the negative narratives in your learning environments. That's all we have for this week. Oh, wait, no, we don't. Next week, we have Bobby Mills coming to talk about assistant principals and their path to promotion. And we're going to do all of that again through the lens of Black History Month and power as always. And so want to say thank you for joining another episode of Let's Talk Power Live. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you for being here.